Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Galacron here. Aries, part 2. Just part 1 was laying some groundwork, and now we're at part 2, and we're gonna jump into way more Aries, the god of war himself, here. So we go to the origin of Aries. Seeking out the origins of a deity is a fascinating exercise, but the origins of the ancient Greek gods are made more fascinating by the conclusions that scholars reach in the process. These conclusions are tied to the efforts by historians to understand the rise and fall of cultures in the Mediterranean. So, the most commonly known historical period of ancient Greece is the classical period, 510 BC to 323 BC. So roughly in that era. And refers to the period that stretched from the advent of democracy in Athens to the death of Alexander the Great and the fracturing of the Macedonian Empire. Before the classical period, there was the Archaic period, 800 BC to 510 BC, an era characterized by a monumental surge in population growth and the fledgling crystallization of ancient Greek culture. The population gathered into the cultural centers that later became the Palaeus of ancient Greece, and the styles of ceramic art progressed rapidly from simple geometric patterns to the technologically advanced red figure pottery that was highly coveted by the Etruscan elite in Italy. I've seen some of this in person. It's pretty awesome. It's great. Furthermore, the common Greek alphabet was adopted at this time too, resulting in some of the greatest works of literature in the Western tradition, such as Homer's The Iliad and Homer's The Odyssey. Those are two obvious picks. And Hesiod's Works and Days, and this is the Bible of Greek mythology, Hesiod's Theogony. Prior to this period of artistic literary, the Cultural Renaissance was a period of around 300 years, in which no notable development took place. This period is unsurprisingly known today as the Dark Age, or the Dark Ages, and that's a lot to get into when, the Christian church, hid all of the science that had been discovered inside the churches, and that's a lot to get into, is the Dark Ages. There was some stuff developed, but that's a lot to get into. The Greek Dark Age was not an era into which the populace declined slowly. Over a period of around 100 to 150 years, the archaeology of ancient Greece suggests that Bronze Age civilizations went into a steep decline. Sites such as Knossos, Mycenae, and Pylos, once the centers of the great Mycenaean civilization, 1600 to 1100 BC, fell into disuse, and the glory days of their culture were forgotten. Oh, we love history, don't we? All the mistakes we made. This culture boasted elite artisans, complex political and religious structures, and an advanced language and writing system modern archaeologists have used to learn more about their culture. During the Mycenaean period, official documents were written in the alphabet known today as Linear B, which is similar to that used in later periods of Greek history. But on the whole, its characteristics are distinct, and it transcribed a language that was not native to the time of Herodotus, Thucydides. Most of the names of the gods are still indecipherable, but sometimes those mystical names are punctuated with the perfectly legible and understandable names of the Greek gods people know of today. It should be noted here that scholars believe these words are names despite their unconventional transcriptions, because they appear in long lists amidst other more decipherable names written in the dative form, suggesting that the lists denoted prescribed rules for sacrifices to gods. It is quite a common paradox for an archaeologist to use the word thankfully for a tragic event in history, since this type of event often reveals the most historical information. But in the case of Linear B, the method of destruction of the great Mycenaean culture centers was what made these lists permanent rather than ephemeral. In the space of a little more than a century and a half, the great palaces at Knossos, Thebes, Mycenae, and Pylos were all destroyed by presumably accidental fires. We know that's not true. The common writing tools of the day were styluses and unbaked clay tablets. Mycenaean scribes wrote down detailed accounts of stores, long comprehensive lists of the taxes collected from the populace, and how much of that wealth was to be dedicated to each god, and then simply pressed the soft clay flat in order for it to be used again. Luckily, at least for posterity, the destructive fires preserved the final copies of these tablets by baking them solid. On these tablets, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Enyalios all appear in almost the same way as in later Greek, but Ares is different. The word ara / R, appears in the texts meaning curse or imprecation, and it is etymologically linked with both Ares and the name Ara / Ra, used to refer to a goddess who was the personification of destruction and revenge. In fact, in Aeschylus's Eumenides, the Furies say that Ara is their own name, suggesting that intimidating etymological sentiment remained strong well into the classical period. After the fall of the Mycenaean civilization and the subsequent Dark Age, Ares' name appears fully legible, but it does not always refer to the god himself. Homer uses the word Ares to refer to battle, and employs it in formulaic expressions like stand fast against sharp Ares. So they're saying basically it could be used as battle. So you could say stand fast against sharp battle. Or to measure one's strength in Ares. So you could say to measure one's strength in battle. So multiple usage of the term Ares. Which, again, I'm not surprised by that. It also makes up the adjective form Arios, which is found as an epithet for many gods, such as Zeus Arios, and even Aphrodite Arios, when referring to their function or appearance in battles and war. This adjective was later combined with the word pagos, meaning hill/rock, as the name for the Areopagus, the hill in Athens that served as the court for homicide, and I've heard of this, into the 3rd century BC, the very same hill where it was said that Ares defended himself after he killed Poseidon's son, Halirrhothios. So yeah, for a long time, that particular hill, Ares, it was kind of like a court, and Ares defended himself, and he's like, well, And Poseidon's son was going to rape my daughter, and I killed him. And I'm here to defend, and so that one spot became a court for, murder trial. So that's kind of interesting. The etymological roots of Ares' name are both deep and highly revelatory. Ares' nature of the god of war is not as all-encompassing as one might have originally thought. Ares, to the ancient Greek, whose language was colored with the history of Linear B and lyric poetry, would have referred to that part of war that was pure passion and unbridled violence, laden with blind revenge. In the light of this etymology, Ares' true nature starts to take form, especially in contrast with Athena, his half-sister, who's goddess of wisdom and goddess of military strategy of war. Again, the separation of the two. Ares and Athena are both gods of war, but in different facets, in different ways, in different forms. Ares is more bloodlust, and the battle part, the fighting part, the violence part. Ares as the god of, or the abstract noun for throng of battle/war, holds very few surprises for the modern reader. His chariot being drawn by Phobos, which is fear, and Deimos, which is terror, is perfectly in keeping with his role since, as Walter Burkert said, he is overwhelming, insatiable in battle, destructive and manslaughtering. Yeah, that sounds like Ares. Any hero was considered a branch of Ares, and he was invoked by generals and soldiers alike when they were in need of courage. Throughout the Iliad, any hero dear to Ares, Menelaus, the king of Sparta, was one who showed courage in battle because, regardless of origin or allegiance, this is what Ares favored above all else, and this has its own foundation in Hesiod's Theogony. In his Works and Days, Hesiod tells the story of the origin of man in two parts. The first part was the story of Prometheus and Pandora and the gifts bestowed upon mankind for which they should live in grateful humility henceforth. The second story is no less moralistic in that it talks of the characteristics of previous incarnations of mankind that were either rewarded or punished by the gods for their behavior. According to Hesiod, mankind has 5 ages, the last of which, iron, he considered himself and his readers to be members of. He does not define them by distinct periods of time, but instead by the characteristics everyone in each age embodied. The first age was that of gold, and these humans were created by the Titans, rulers of the cosmos before Zeus and his family of gods. The Golden Age humans lived exceedingly long lives that were free of war or famine, since they did not have to work for their food, but simply accepted what the earth willingly provided for them. These humans died peacefully, but remained on the earth as daemons, or spirits, with which other later humans could converse if they had the capacity. I think I would need some more explanation on that, expand on that. The second age was that of silver. These humans lived shorter lives than their predecessors, but the majority of those lives was spent in childhood and adolescence. They lived carefree under the watchful eye of a matriarchal society, but once they reached adulthood they became disputatious and quarreled amongst each other, perhaps because they spent so long in immaturity They never saw the reason to worship the gods, and therefore Zeus had them destroyed for being impious. The Third Age, and that which foreshadowed the glorious heroic age from which the greatest stories of Greek mythology come, was that of bronze, and it was inextricably associated with Ares. Hesiod called them a brazen race sprung from the ash trees, and it was in no way like the Silver Age, but was terrible and strong. They loved the lamentable works of Ares and deeds of violence. Ares, in fact, is given the epithet kalkios, meaning brazen. Like the metal and the humans of the Bronze Age did nothing, no farming, no worship, no eating of bread. That wasn't associated with him. Bronze was synonymous with weaponry and war in ancient Greece. The flashing bronze, armed soldiers swung in battle, rang with a specific sound that was said to ward off the magic and witchcraft employed by the enemy. The javelin, the iconic weapon of the Bronze and heroic ages, was just as the race of bronze, made up of a bronze blade, attached to a strong yet supple wood, ash. Ash being the magical tree connected with any being that prized fighting over any other endeavor. Like the Spartoi of Thebes, the humans of the Bronze Age were born from the earth fully armed in bands of war-crazed beings, just like the giants. Furthermore, due to their focus on war and their complete lack of interest in paying due honor to the gods, it could be argued that they did indeed pay honor to Ares through fighting, but without the ritualistic sacrifice of animals. Offering this form of devotion would not have been acceptable to a pious Greek. They were damned for their hubris. The form of this damnation? When the race of bronze and the giants reached Hades after their death, they dissipated into nothingness and were denied the glory of an afterlife. I didn't know that about the giants. When they went to the underworld, they were dissipated into nothingness. That I didn't know. That's new to me. I thought they either died and went to the underworld, or they were buried somewhere under a mountain or under something. As these stories suggest, war was a highly ritualized event in ancient Greece. The Spartans bathed and preened themselves so they could embody the ancient Greek ideal of kalos thanatos, or beautiful dead, if they were slain. There was a reason for war, unsurprisingly, the agricultural season 2, and the oracles were consulted to see where and against whom the armies would attack. Sacrifices were made before battles, utilizing augury and the temples at Delphi, again with oracles at Delphi, my goodness, always, were festooned with offerings of thanks for victories in battle and war. Warfare was not a hubristic act in and of itself, and therefore the humans of the Bronze Age, with their ferocious bloodlust, were not necessarily the hubristic embodiment of war per se, but instead the embodiment of all that was Arios. Now, important myths featuring Ares. We go to the foundation of Thebes, which was where Hercules was born. Agenor, son of Poseidon, left Egypt in search of a new life in the land of Canaan. There he married the beautiful Telephassa, and they had a fine family of 6, 5 sons and 1 daughter, the famed Europa. The eldest son was called Cadmus. That's where DC Comics got it from. Cadmus, the shadow cabinet of the government. Like his father, he too was fated for greatness far from the place of his birth. Cadmus was a fine man and a soldier without equal. He left the land of Canaan with his mother and visited the lush islands of the Mediterranean in search of a new home for himself and his family. Before the fair Telephassa died, she and Cadmus traveled widely, visiting Rhodes and Thera, dedicating temples and priesthoods as they went, but never coming across the land they felt could be their home. After his mother died, however, Cadmus was struck with a fraternal longing for his only sister, who had been abducted from the shores of his father's empire, long before, and whose location nobody seemed to know. So, Cadmus abandoned his fruitless search for a home and made a pilgrimage to Delphi, the great oracular center of, it was the center, all right, center of Mediterranean civilizations, in the hope of receiving divine help in his search for his sister. When he arrived, he asked the oracle where he could find Europa. Forget your search. Your sister has been chosen by a god to fulfill the legacy of a generation, said the oracle. She then took him outside. She pointed to an untethered cow on a path outside the temple. An untethered cow. Follow the cow until it falls down exhausted. There you shall build your city. I'd be like, what? Thus, Cadmus left Delphi and, following the apparent wisdom of the prescribed cow, dusted his sandals in its crescent moon tracks. It was admittedly a beautiful beast with the markings of a white full moon on each flank, and Cadmus followed it north from Delphi, never stopping for food or water until it finally collapsed in the land of Boeotia. It was at that site that pious Cadmus heeded the oracle's advice and built a great city, which he later named Thebes. Remember, Hercules was born in Thebes, a Theban. Here, Cadmus erected an image of Athena on the spot where the cow fell, and told his companions that the beast had to be sacrificed to the goddess with all haste. His companions took it upon themselves to fetch fresh water for the sacrifice from a nearby spring, while Cadmus watched over the sacred animal. Today, the spring is known as the Castilian Spring, but in the days of Cadmus, it was known as the Spring of Ares. The companions' innocent sortie turned bloody soon enough, as they found the Spring of Ares was guarded by a giant serpent. The serpent was the offspring of Ares and the fury Telephassa, and had long protected the lustral waters of the spring, and just as its father did on the field of battle, the serpent made short work of the band of men on their pious mission. So, we go to an ancient depiction of Cadmus fighting the dragon. So yeah, he fights the dragon. So, these five would eventually become the founding fathers of the great city of Thebes. But this was not enough for the god of war. Ares had placed the serpent at his spring to protect the sacred waters, and Cadmus's actions not only constituted a trespass on the land, but a trespass against the god too. Trespass that had to be avenged. So, he's upset that they killed the serpent. Ares is upset. Cadmus served the god of war as a slave for 8 years to appease Ares' wrath, and once the service came to an end, he married Ares' daughter, Harmonia. And theirs was the first wedding of mortals that the entire divine pantheon attended. Wow, that's interesting. The gifts were plentiful, especially those afforded the beautiful Harmonia, and wine flowed, of course, and Apollo delighted mortal and immortal alike with his mastery of the lyre. But Ares, despite the just punishment he had imparted, still bore hatred and vengeful thoughts for the mortal founder of Thebes. Cadmus was not ignorant of the animosity the god still harbored for him. And so, in another attempt to placate him, Cadmus relinquished his rule over Thebes to the Spartos Echion, born into Ares' bloodline, and he and Harmonia left the city for good. Liberated from Ares' disapproving eye, Cadmus and Harmonia consulted the Delphic oracle again. Man, that temple of oracles in Delphi has been there a very long time. I mean, we're talking 40,000 years or something. And she told them they would rule over a horde of barbarians that would conquer many Greek cities after a series of bitterly fought battles, a prophecy as true as the last. When the god of war looked upon these vanquished cities bathed in blood, he smiled at the work of his daughter and her husband, who he once despised. He was so pleased, in fact, that he chose to take Cadmus and Harmonia from the mortal plane before their horde suffered an inglorious end, and transform them into a pair of serpents, whose forms they would enjoy together for eternity in the islands of the blessed. Okay. So we have the murder of Halirrhothius. Little can keep the god of war so pleased for long, however. Soon enough, he caught sight of Halirrhothius, a son of Poseidon, pursuing another of his daughters, Alcippe. Pursuit turned to annoyance and subsequently harassment as Halirrhothius displayed the fierce lust for young women he inherited from his father, Poseidon. We'll get into Poseidon later. When harassment turned to rape, however, Ares didn't hesitate for a moment to brutally murder Poseidon's son. Poseidon, disinterested in the plight of Alcippe, was furious at Ares and called a meeting of the gods, the likes of which there had never been before. Rather than meet on Mount Olympus, Poseidon convened the immortals into a court of law, the first of its kind, in the city he had lost to Athena. It was on a low hill in Athens. Then, that Poseidon made his case against the god of war, calling him by all the abominable names known to man and God. The gods listened and awaited Ares' response to the accusations of his cold-blooded murder of a fellow immortal's son. Ares' defense was simple. Halirrhothius suffered the fate of a rapist. Ares was absolved of his sins, and the small hill in Athens where the first court of law took place came to be known as the Hill of Ares, or the Areopagus, henceforth the place of civic judgment for mortals as well. Now we go to the Amazons. The Amazons of the Doentian plain were by no means gentle. Well-conducted folk, they were brutal and aggressive, and their main concern in life was war. War indeed was in their blood, daughters of Ares as they were. The fierce Amazonian women were the daughters of Ares, and he showed no restraint in the doting love he showered upon them. He was said to have led them into many battles personally, and two of their queens in particular stand out as his favorites, Hippolyta and Penthesilea. To Hippolyta he gave the famous dart-winged brazen birds. These protected an island where she dedicated a rustic temple, and where the Amazons sacrificed horses to the god of war. These birds, when frightened by the oncoming Argo, Jason and the Argonauts, Argo the ship, dropped their blade-like plumage onto the decks and injured some of the Argonauts who were looking dumbstruck to the skies. This wouldn't be the only time the Argonauts came into contact with a beast of Ares. They passed the island where the dart-winged birds lived on their way to collect the golden fleece. But their task was made more difficult by the Colchian dragon. This dragon, enormous and ferocious, some said, was son of Ares, who never slept, but instead lay in wait at the bole of the apple tree where the fleece was hung. Ares also gave Hippolyta his own magical belt, as a sign of her preeminence amongst the maids of war. This magnificent belt was the object of one of Hercules' 12 labors, in which he had to travel to the country of the Amazons, Themyscira, to retrieve it. Hercules succeeded in completing the labor, but Hippolyta died fighting him in the process. It's no wonder Ares and Hercules don't like each other, but that's for another day. Penthesilea, the other favorite daughter of Ares and sister of Hippolyta, joined the Trojan forces in defense against the Greeks and swore to prove to the world that her Amazons were equal in warfare with any other nation. Not satisfied with mere equality, however, Penthesilea swore further to kill the greatest warrior among the Greeks or Trojans, Achilles. The two great warriors met in hand-to-hand combat. Achilles was recognizable by his shining armor, but Penthesilea, wearing armor that covered her face and disguised her gender, was unknown to the Greek hero. The battle was ferocious, and Penthesilea almost bested Achilles until, with the thrust of his lance, he impaled the queen and her horse together. He approached her corpse to rid it of its armor, but was seized with grief as he lifted her helmet. She was made a wonder of beauty, even in her death by Aphrodite, glorious crowned, the bride of Ares, the strong war god, to end that he, the son of noble Peleus, might be pierced with the sharp arrow of repentant love. The warriors gazed, and in their hearts they prayed that fair and sweet like her their wives might seem, laid on the bed of love when home they won. Yea, and Achilles' very heart was wrung with love's remorse to have slain a thing so sweet, who might have borne her home his queenly bride, to chariot glorious Pythia, for she was flawless, a very daughter of the gods, divinely tall and most divinely fair. Alrighty. Ares on the battlefield. Diomedes, dear to my heart, fear thou not, Ares, for that neither any other of the immortals, so present a helper am I to thee. Nay, come, at Ares first drive thou thy single-hooved horses, and smite him in close fight. Neither have thou awe of furious Ares, that raveth here a full-wrought bane, a renegade, that but now spake with me and Hera, and made as though he would fight against the Trojans, but give aid to the Argives. Yet now he consorteth with the Trojans, and hath forgotten these. In this passage, Athena encouraged the Greek warrior Diomedes not to be afraid of anybody, mortal or otherwise, on the battlefield, but instead to charge even the god of war if he appeared to be favoring the opposition. Again, Ares, Athena, rivals. Ordinarily, Ares mostly made a point of not supporting one side or another in any conflict, regardless of the motivations behind the battles and wars. Ares favored one thing above all: bravery. As a result, when his sister and mother implored him not to be impartial at Troy, his agreement to do so was an uncharacteristic move. Athena and Hera appealed to his sense of family loyalty. They had been slighted by a Trojan, and that slight had to be avenged. The Trojan in question was Paris, and his crime against Athena and Hera was judging Aphrodite to be the most beautiful among them. His judgment was influenced, at least in part, by the fact that Aphrodite offered Paris the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, despite her already having a husband, which was Menelaus. Paris wanted Helen. However, Athena and Hera were unmoved by the decade of fighting between Trojans and Greeks that Aphrodite's gift had caused. Though the funeral pyres had lit up the skies in their multitudes, Athena and Hera were still furious that they hadn't seen Paris's body among those burned. The problem with Ares' predicament, of course, was the strange love he and the winner of the Apple of Discord had. Aphrodite and Ares had a hitherto unspoken bond that was certainly strong enough to convince Ares to abandon his previous bias for the Greeks and lend support to Aphrodite's Trojans. Now again, Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, but Aphrodite and Ares still had a thing for each other. This was the change of allegiance that led Athena to encourage Diomedes, the greatest warrior among the Greeks, and whom Achilles refused to fight, to suppress all thoughts of religious piety and attack any god or goddess favoring the Trojan cause if he met them on the battlefield. Previously, when Diomedes saw Ares helping the Trojans during a battle, he told his men to retreat cautiously from the god of war. However, when Athena realized that her brother had betrayed her, she went to Zeus and asked for permission to engage him. Zeus, being the cool guy he is, granted her request, and she mounted Diomedes' chariot next to him and drove the horses towards Ares. Big surprise. While she was away, Diomedes had flown into a rage and wounded Aphrodite, who had been aiding her beloved Trojans. Now, Athena stood beside him and told him not to let the flames of his ire die down, but instead to stoke them further in the face of the god of war. Thus the goddess and mortal approached Ares and found him stripping the armor off a dead soldier. And when they were now come near, as they advanced one against the other, Ares first let drive over the yoke and the reins of the horses with his spear of bronze. What a guy. Eager to take away the other's life, but the spear, the goddess, flashing-eyed Athena, caught in her hand and thrust above the car to fly its way in vain. Next, Diomedes, good at the war cry, drave at Ares with his spear of bronze, and Pallas Athena sped it mightily against his nethermost belly, where he was girded with his taslets. There did he thrust and smite him, rendering the fair flesh, and forth he drew the spear again. Then brazen Ares bellowed loud as 9,000 warriors or 10,000 cry in battle when they join in the strife of the war god. Which, yes, Ares could do that. Ares' voice could be super loud like a sonic blast. Ares, yes, could actually do that. And thereat trembling came upon Achaeans alike and Trojans, and fear got hold of them. So mightily bellowed Ares, insatiate of war. Yeah, if Ares does a sonic scream, everybody hears it. Injured and offended by the hubris of this petty mortal, Ares flew to his father Zeus on Mount Olympus. Father Zeus, hast thou no indignation to behold these violent deeds? Ever do we gods continually suffer most cruelly by one another's devices, when as we show favor to men. With thee are we all at strife, for thou art father to that mad and baneful maid, whose mind is ever set on deeds of lawlessness. For all the other gods that are in Olympus, and obedient unto thee, and subject to thee, each one of us, but to her thou payest no heed, whether in word or in deed, but rather settest her on, for that this pestilent maiden is thine own child. Now hath she set on the son of Tydeus, Diomedes high of heart, to vent this rage upon immortal gods. Aphrodite first he wounded with a thrust in close fight upon the hand, at the wrist, and thereafter rushed upon mine own self as he had been a god. Howbeit my swift feet bear me away, otherwise had I long suffered woes there amid the gruesome heaps of the dead, or else had lived strengthless by reason of the smitings of the spear. Ares was not greeted with the paternal sympathy he had expected from Zeus. Sit thou not in any wise by me and whine, thou renegade. Most hateful to me art thou of all gods that hold Olympus. This is Zeus talking to Ares. Forever is strife dear to thee, and wars and fightings. Thou hast the unbearable, unyielding spirit of thy mother, even of Hera. because Hera is the mother of Ares and Zeus, father of Ares. Her can I scarce control by my words. Wherefore it is by her promptings, meseems that thou sufferest thus. Howbeit I will no longer endure that thou shouldest be in pain, for thou art mine offspring, and it was to me that thy mother bare thee. But wert thou born of any other god, thus pestilent as thou art, then long ere this hadst thou been lower than the sons of heaven. Ares then left his father's side and saw to his wounds. They were neither his first in battle nor his last, and it was certainly not the end of his part in the Trojan War. In ancient Greece, rumor spread as easily and as brazenly as wildfire. Fierce men from the islands and mountains kept a wary ear to the wind for opportunities to increase their renown and be noticed by the gods. Cycnus was one such ferocious man, and he purposefully released provocative words into the Greek Peleus in full knowledge of the effect that they would have. He challenged all those Greeks who believed that they had skill to match him in a chariot duel to come to his home in northern Thessaly and fight for great prizes. Unbeknownst to these unfortunate pretenders, Cycnus was a son of Ares. Cycnus, son of Ares. By this time, Apollo had grown angry with Cycnus because he had continuously waylaid great herds of sacrificial animals from the north that were destined for his temple at Delphi. So, he ensured the rumor found its way to the great Hercules, and then incited the demigod, when Hercules was still mortal, to accept Cycnus's challenge. Hercules had already completed the 12 labors. He was honor-bound to endure and had been traveling across the Mediterranean, bringing many cities to the sword, which is true. After the 12 labors, Hercules did a lot. The chariot was not his preferred form of combat, but he heeded the request of his half-brother Apollo and donned the new armor and weaponry given to him by the mighty smith god Hephaestus. That's interesting. Weapons and armor from his half-brother Hephaestus. When he arrived at Cycnus's home, Hercules was faced with the brutal piety of the challenger. Being the son of Ares, Cycnus was no less bellicose or skilled in battle, and the fruits of his many victories were used to build a temple to his father. The decapitated skulls of the recently fallen were laid atop each other, fresh and putrid blood mixed to make the mortar for a sturdy and macabre temple to the god of war. I don't know, it's kind of nasty, but that's Cycnus for you. Hercules took his companion Aeolus, that's his nephew, as his second in his chariot. But before he arrived on the chosen battlefield, they were visited by the goddess Athena. Athena told them that Cycnus's second was none other than the god of war himself, Ares. This doesn't seem fair, but let's continue. Hercules had met Ares in battle once before, as he attacked the Pylos, So Athena told Hercules he was not sanctioned to take on the god as an equal, but only to wound him if he came near. Hercules agreed, and Athena joined them both on the chariot as they sped into battle. And they, horse-taming Cycnus and Ares, insatiable in war, came on together like fire or whirlwind. Then their horses neighed shrilly, face to face, and the echo was shivered all around them. And mighty Heracles spoke first and said to that other, Cycnus, my friend, why do you set your swift horses at us, men who are tried in labor and pain? No, guide your fleet car aside and yield, and go out of the path, fool. For Ares shall not deliver you from the end of death, if we two meet together in battle. Hercules is calling it before it's even started. Another time ere this I declare he was made trial of my spear, when he defended sandy Pylos and stood against me. Like, dude, I kicked your old man's ass before, and I could do it again. And the same fate will befall you. When he defended sandy Pylos, fiercely longing for fight. Thrice was he stricken by my spear, and dashed to earth, and his shield was pierced. Hercules is pretty strong, piercing the shield. But the fourth time I struck his thigh, laying on with all my strength, and tore deep into his flesh. Yeah, Hercules can beat up Ares, and has done so 2 times. 2 times, I think. In that one time, he struck Ares 3 times with his spear. Cycnus by this time was burning with a white-hot fever for battle and took no notice of Hercules' words. Instead, with his father beside him, he spurred the horses on toward the opposing chariot. Both Hercules and Cycnus were dashed from their chariots as their first blows hit each other's shields, but each collected himself with godlike speed and took up the fight again. Then Cycnus, eager to kill the son of almighty Zeus, struck upon his shield with a brazen spear, but did not break the bronze, and the gift of the gods saved his foe. But the son of Amphitryon, mighty Heracles, with his long spear struck Cycnus violently in the neck, beneath the chin, where it was unguarded between helm and shield, and the deadly spear cut through the 2 sinews, for the hero's full strength lighted on his foe. That's one thing you don't want, is the wrath of Hercules' full strength. I mean, he held up the heavens for 3 hours. He held up the vault. And Cycnus fell as an oak falls, or a lofty pine that is stricken by the lurid thunderbolt of Zeus. Even so he fell, and his armor adorned with bronze clashed about him. Then the stout-hearted son of Zeus let him be, and himself watched for the onset of man-slaying Ares. Fiercely he stared, like a lion who has come upon a body and full eagerly rips the hide with his strong claws and takes away the sweet life with all speed. His dark heart is filled with rage, and his eyes glare fiercely, while he tears up the earth with his paws and lashes his flanks and shoulders with his tail, so that no one dares to face him and go near to give battle. Even so, the son of Amphitryon, unsated of battle, stood eagerly face to face with Ares, nursing courage in his heart. And Ares drew near him with grief in his heart, and they both sprang at one another with a cry. Now we're talking. But Athena, the daughter of Aegis-bearing Zeus came to meet Ares wearing the dark Aegis. That's the shield that's unbreakable. It originally belonged to Zeus, and then Athena was allowed to borrow the Aegis. And she looked at him with an angry frown and spoke winged words to him. Ares, check your fierce anger and matchless hands, for it is not ordained that you should kill Heracles, the bold-hearted son of Zeus, and strip off his rich armor. Come, then, cease fighting and do not withstand me. So said she, but did not move the courageous spirit of Ares. But he uttered a great shout, and waving his spears like fire, he rushed headlong at strong Heracles, longing to kill him, and hurled a brazen spear upon the great shield, for he was furiously angry because of his dead son. But bright-eyed Athena reached out from the chariot and turned aside the force of the spear. Then bitter grief seized Ares, and he drew his keen sword and leapt upon bold-hearted Heracles. But as he came on, the son of Amphitryon, unsated of fierce battle, shrewdly wounded his thigh where it was exposed under his richly wrought shield, and tore deep into his flesh with the spear thrust and cast him flat upon the ground. And panic and dread quickly drove his smooth-wheeled chariot and horses near him, and lifted him from the wide-pathed earth into his richly wrought car, and then straight lashed the horses and came to high Olympus. So once again, Hercules defeats Ares. So every time in the myth that Heracles has fought Ares, Hercules comes out on top. I mean, every time it is written in the myth of Hercules fighting Ares, again, I think it's 4 different times, but I could be wrong on that. It might be 3. So, yeah. Ares is the god of war, but Ares might even be a better fighter in skill than Hercules. But there is one problem. Hercules is just too strong for anyone. Hercules is even stronger than Zeus physically. That doesn't mean he can beat Zeus. I ain't saying that. Zeus has too many things other than physical strength that will beat his own son, Hercules. But Hercules is too strong for Ares, and also he had an outstanding unbreakable shield made for him by Hephaestus, and great armor from Hephaestus. So when you put all that together in this particular fight, it's like, dude, Hercules is going to win. He's too strong for Ares, and Hercules has an unbreakable shield and outstanding armor. It's like, no way. In this fight, Hercules is going to beat Ares. Like it or not, it's the way of things. So we will pause right there, because the next chapter we go into is Ares and Athena. So, anyways, thank you. This is Galacron signing out, and please tune in next time for Ares and Athena, the next chapter. Bye-bye now.